G'day, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to demonstrate 6 really effective wrist mobility exercises that you can do today that will get you instant results. Now this video is for anyone who is dealing with some maybe wrist joints restrictions, maybe you're looking to get some extra mobility through your wrist muscles, maybe you've had an injury and you're just looking to reclaim some normal function again. This video is going to go through some joint specific stretches. Some really basic stretches for the muscle tissue. But then towards the end of the video, I want to go through one really interesting exercise that I'm finding is crucial in maintaining and restoring normal motion to the wrist. And it's not one that I think a lot of people would be expecting clicking on this video. And it's definitely not one that I'm seeing talked about enough in the industry. So if you're really interested to learn what that is and how to do that, hang around towards the end of the video and we'll go through that for you. Now, before we get to this, obviously, if you genuinely find this information helpful and useful, please consider letting me know in the comments down below. Let me know what you're dealing with. Are you recovering from an injury, maybe a wrist fracture, or are you just someone who wants to have better functioning wrists? Maybe you're a basketballer who wants to be able to shoot and dribble better. Obviously, wrist mobility is really important for that. Or if you're just someone who's wanting to improve your wrist function as a whole, let me know down below. I'm always interested to know. Further to that, please consider leaving a like rating down below. Consider subscribing if you're new. If this video is groundbreaking for you, or if you find it really, really helpful, then I'd appreciate you consider leaving a super thanks donation as well. It's just a great way to help support the channel. Having said that, let's get into these exercises. So the main thing we want to touch on, as I said, is the first load of wrist mobility exercises that we're going to go through. The first 2 revolve around trying to improve the malleability of your joint capsule. So for anyone who doesn't know, most joints in the body are surrounded by a fibrous capsule that encloses the joint. And for some people, that joint capsule can become, I guess, rusty and stiff. So not stiff in the way that a lot of people talk about in terms of muscular stability, but stiffness in terms of something being rusty and restricted. And all the wrist muscle stretches in the world, the muscular stretches in the world, generally don't account for that deep joint capsular stiffness. So we're going to start with the capsular exercises first to really give us a head start on that wrist mobility. Now, as we do with all stretches, we want to make sure that you do a test and a retest so that you can genuinely see if this exercise or these exercises are working for you. You never have to take my word for any of this. If these are working for you, you will see a genuine change in your wrist mobility straight away after doing each one of these exercises. And that's obviously the goal. As simple as that sounds, no longer should you have to persist with wrist mobility exercises for 6 weeks in the hope that you'll eventually feel a bit looser. If you're genuinely not seeing an instant change or instant progress, then you probably haven't made change or instant progress. So hold me to that. We always want to set a high standard with these videos. So the first wrist mobility exercises that we need to go through, or the first 2, requires you to have a band of some sort. Now this is a power band, a jump stretch band. We use these a lot on the channel. I'll leave a link below in the description if you want to see what they are. If you want to pick one up, that's fine. But you can use a TheraBand or a resistance band as well. You can use anything that you want. It does help if there is a bit of thickness to it because we're going to wrap it around your wrist. And if it is like a TheraTubing, for example, it can feel like it really presses in. If that's the case, maybe use a tissue or some toilet paper or some paper towel, whatever it is, just to save your wrist a little bit. But again, what we want to do is we want to test your wrist mobility, get a sense of how loose and free it feels in all directions. Then what we want to do here first is we're going to go after wrist extension. So we're going to try and open up the wrist capsule on the inside here. The way to do this really well is you want to slide your hand in so that your palm is facing where the band is connected to. What we want to do with this, and hopefully you can pick this up, is we want to put your wrist down so your hands are pointing away from the band. And what we want to do is we want to start with your elbow bent. And I like to block the band so that the band doesn't slide around when I do this. All we're doing here is we're putting enough tension on the band just above the bones of the wrist, so where your sort of wrist bones feel like they are. And all we're going to do here is we're going to gently take your arm out straight, and we're going to hinge over towards your fingers as far as you feel comfortable going. And what you'll find is you'll hopefully feel that underneath your wrist, there'll be a really nice stretch. Obviously, be gentle, be respectful. Don't jam the wrist up. Just find a position that you feel very comfortable with. We want to hang out here for about a minute or 2. You can gently oscillate in and out of the end of that range if you want to. You've got some options here. The other thing that I like to get my patients to do is play around with the position of your forearm. So you can turn your elbow back towards you to really wind up that wrist joint. You can let it flare out a little bit more and rotate back around this way. Just find the position that you feel is most restricted for you. So as I really wind this up, I can feel right at the end there is for me where I get best access to my restriction. So I want to be in this position for the duration of the stretch. Again, if you haven't done this before, maybe don't start with 1 or 2 minutes. Just start with 15 to 20 seconds, just to ease into it. Then what you'll find is after a very short amount of time, you might find you can start to go a little bit further and further over the top of that. And again, play around with the position of your elbow and your forearm just to make sure that you're connecting with the areas that need the most TLC. Now, the other thing that we can do on top of this is we can include some of the soft tissue that is tight in this area. So we've got the band hooking into the joint, pulling the joint open so that we can gently walk through that. What you can do here, once you've found your best position, you can gently try and sort of push your fingers back into the mat, try and gently make a fist without moving. The idea being that you're flaring up, or probably a better word is activating the muscles of your wrist, the wrist flexors. You want to hold that for about 5 to 10 seconds and then relax. Then you might find you can go a little bit further again than what you could before. So that wrist extension exercise is a really great way. And for me, that feels instantly much looser than what it did before. Compared to my left side, there's a big difference. So hooking the band into the joint, getting some distraction at the joint as you're coming over the top is a great way to bias that joint stiffness. If you're just doing your regular stretches, which we'll get to in a second, and you're stiff here, the joint's physically stiff, or the joints of that area are physically stiff, then you're working against a really strong resistance and potentially not being able to lengthen those muscles to the position that you need to get the best out of it. So that's a fantastic way to start. The second way to do this is we're going to go through a wrist extensor stretch. So it's essentially the same exercise. Band comes out, resting the back of your hand on the mat. Again, your fingers are pointing away from the band for this one. Be gentle. This one often doesn't feel as comfortable as the other one. So just ease into that as far as you feel comfortable. Again, taking note to see where your best version of that stretch is. Find that stretch. Squeeze all the muscles, push the back of your fingers into the mat, make those muscles work for 5 to 10 seconds, then relax, go a little bit further. Now, traditionally, most people tend to lose that wrist extension more so than the wrist flexion. But again, if that aspect of the joint capsule is stiff, the band's a fantastic way to do that. So those first two exercises are crucial because they get to the underlying potential restrictions, which is often that joint capsule, so that when we layer on some soft tissue work over the top, then you're going to have a much more rounded, targeted exercise routine. So they're the first two exercises. The next two exercises are your general wrist stretches. So again, these aren't sexy. They're probably not that interesting, but the point of this basically is we want to stretch any and all soft tissue that's restricted in your forearm, front and back. Again, a great way to do that is I like to have my thumb at the back of the hand with my fingers over the top. We're going to start with your elbow bent, and we're going to bend that wrist as far as you feel comfortable. And we're using my finger as sort of leverage, or my thumb as leverage, to really sort of crank those fingers back as far as you feel comfortable, looking for where your best stretch is. So again, same thing with those other stretches. You can gently, keeping your elbow where it is, you can gently rotate your hand and wrist in different directions, looking for where that tightness is for you. And then as we did with the banded exercise, I'm going to get you to push back into the surface that you're on. So that being my opposite hand, I'm going to gently push my fingers back into that area to activate those muscles optimally. And then when they relax, you'll see that they'll give and it will release a little bit faster than if you just held this stretch. So part one of this stretch is doing that. So I found a good stretch here. I'm going to push back into my opposite hand, make those muscles work for a few seconds. Then when I relax, you should see that you can go a little bit further again, a little bit further than before. Same thing again, tense that up as much as you feel you can for about 5 seconds. Then when you relax, you might find you can go back a little bit further again. Once you've come to the end of that, or you've had enough, we'll repeat that process with your elbow out straight. This just adds a different dimension in terms of the fascial demands. We're going to include different aspects of the muscle. So make sure that you don't miss this as well. Again, rotate your arm around, just trying to find where you feel your best version of the stretch is. So I've got a nice one just here. Then same thing again, push back into that hand, make those muscles work. And then again, you should feel an immediate difference in terms of how loose and how free those wrists and forearms and even your hands might feel from doing that. So that's the wrist flexors. We want to repeat the same process, obviously, with the wrist extensors. So you can start with your elbow bent. So curl your fingers up into a ball if you want to. Really sort of pull that wrist back as best as you feel comfortable. Be gentle because, again, these wrist extensor tendons can be a little bit sensitive for some people, can be uncomfortable. Just find a position that you feel comfortable with. Once you've found that, then gently push your hand back into your other hand, again, to make those wrist extensors tense up. Make them do the work. Then when you relax, you might find you can go a little bit further again. Same deal, keep repeating that process until you've had enough. And then we want to do the same thing with your wrist out straight. It might be awkward to have your fingers bent here, but again, whatever you want to do, just have that wrist bent. Again, make sure that you don't feel uncomfortable here, that you're really jamming that up. There's a bunch of vessels in there. When we talk about carpal tunnel, the nerve that goes through that area can become a bit irritated. So again, if you feel like you're getting some tingling and some pins and needles and numbness, be very respectful. Don't go into it as far, or just make sure you feel comfortable doing it. Same deal. Tense and relax for 5 seconds. 5-second hold, then relax and see if you can go a little bit further. Make sure that you're twisting that arm around. So not the whole arm, lock that elbow in, but just twist it around to find where you feel the best and most effective place to stretch is. Then coupling that with the banded wrist exercises, we're going to get some really good capsular release. And we're also going to feel like the muscles of that wrist really loosen up quickly. So do your test and retest. So retest it again afterwards to see how much looser it feels. It should be looser straight away. Obviously, the more you do it, the looser it should get. And you may not capture all of that restriction day one, but if you keep looking at that process, you'll get to where you need to be really quickly. So they're the first 4 exercises. The 5th exercise requires the use of a ball. And this again can help with any fascial restrictions. This can help with any sort of soft tissue restrictions that the first 2 exercises or the first 2 varieties of exercises don't go through. What we want to do here is we want to take your ball, rest your hand on a table or a bench or the floor, whatever you want to do. I'll do it sitting cross-legged here. All I want to get you to do is dig the ball in. So just finding a spot, put some gentle pressure on there. We're not rolling the ball around. Again, if you're a fan of the channel, you know that I'm not a fan of the rolling technique. It's not specific enough for me and my tastes. So we want to roll the ball around first. So there is some rolling to begin with, but the exercise isn't rolling around. We want the ball to press in. Then all I want you to do here is then start to move your wrist around. So if you have it in your wrist flexors and you extend your wrist, you'll actually start to shear some of that tissue through underneath the compression that you're providing with the ball. And this is really important because when we do this, that fascia should slide smoothly through every surface that it connects with and that it interacts with. So putting some pressure in here and really trying to shear that tissue free, we can really start to connect to a lot of the tissue that the stretches that we've done previously doesn't quite get into. So once you've found a good spot, then basically just extend that wrist, really try and shear that tissue through. As you get closer to the wrist, you can start to add a little bit more sort of rotation and twisting, capture some of those more sort of isolated soft tissues and muscles in that area. So we want to do that on the wrist flexors. Same thing for the wrist extensors. If you've got tennis elbow, if you're dealing with some extensor issues in there, this can be a fantastic way to do that. So again, compress the tissue that you find is a little bit stiff and tight, then very respectfully pull that tissue through past the ball, feed some slack back into this movement and restore some of that normal motion that you may not have done previously. So again, you can put some pressure down on there. That will do wonders. You can also put some pressure down and drag it up and really tension up some of that skin as well. Really help free up that fascial connection in broader ways. So again, that's another great way just to tie everything together. So we're hitting the fascial stuff, the soft tissue stuff, the muscles, the banded joint stuff as well. It's a really comprehensive wrist mobility set of exercises. Now, as promised, the most interesting thing about wrist mobility for me, and this doesn't necessarily apply to someone who's had a physical traumatic injury. So say you've fallen over and broken your wrist and that has stiffened up because you've been in a cast for so long. That's potentially a different conversation, but check this out anyway, because it may still be pulling some strings that you didn't realize. One of the things that I find really interesting about wrist mobility is that it's heavily influenced by the state of your neck. Now that may sound strange because obviously your wrist is all the way out here, your neck's all the way up here, and in some strange world it doesn't feel like they're connected, even though everything's physically connected. But the base of your neck, so the bottom few levels of your neck and maybe the top couple of your upper back have the segments house the nerve roots that come out and form the nerves that supply the muscles and the tissue of your wrist, hands, and forearms. So what I'm finding clinically is if you develop some subtle dysfunction, say that the neck joints become a little bit stiff, a little bit tight, a little bit restricted, maybe because of some poor postures, some poor neck and head positioning, that can potentially cause some neural tension issues that sets up a chain reaction of events that leads to tissues that associate with those nerves becoming tight. So if you're someone who consistently stretches your forearms, but you feel like they consistently keep retightening again, then it would pay to take a very close look at your neck with the ball, free up any restricted tissue that you find, and you might find that it actually stops that tissue from wanting to tighten again. Again, if you've got a broken wrist or you've had an accident that's created some genuine dysfunction, this is very unlikely to be the cure for that, obviously, but you might find that it may also be contributing to some of the muscular tightness in that area. So it's well worth exploring going forward. So we've done this on the channel before, so if you're a fan of the channel, if you're subscribed, you'll know this. But taking a tennis ball or a lacrosse ball to the joints at the base of your neck, want to free up those joints, feed some slack back into that tissue, give it permission to release, and you do it basically as follows. So what we want to do with the ball, we take the ball, for the purposes of this exercise, we want to start the ball right at the main bump at the base of your neck. Now, this tends to be C7. It tends to be the most obvious place to start. So you want to place the ball in the middle, let it roll straight off to the side. So not out further, just literally straight off that bump. And we're going to get you to lie down. You can do this up against a wall if you want to as well. But all we want to do is sort of roll a fraction to one side so we feel like we're on the spine itself. So not the bumps down the middle, those spinous processes, but the spinal column. We don't want to roll off it onto some of the soft tissue. We want to be right on the joints. And what you'll hopefully find is as soon as you put some pressure here, you may start to feel an element of stiffness or restriction or tightness, even some tenderness potentially. And if you're not sure what that feels like, as I always say, compare it to the other side. So compare it to the exact same spot on the other side and see how it feels. And what you'll genuinely feel for most people is you should feel like one side feels more restricted, one side feels less restricted. So even if you find that one wrist or one set of forearm and wrist muscles are tighter than the other, it doesn't always mean that it's stiff on the same side. Again, your body doesn't value you as a left and a right being. It thinks of you as an entire human body. So if you have one side of your neck that's restricted, it can definitely cause some problems on that same side, but it can also cause a set of problems to the other side, which can then cause problems down the arm. So to cut a long story short, look for areas that feel stiff and restricted. Again, we're not rolling around. We're finding a spot that feels a bit tight. We're just staying here. We're letting the ball press in, sink through some of that superficial soft tissue, attached to the joint or the deepest stiffness in those joints, and hopefully getting those joints to start to give and move. Once you've done that, move the ball up a little bit. Just keep hunting up and up and up until you run out of areas that you feel are interesting. Then come back down again and start working down onto your upper back. Same deal, go looking for areas that feel stiff, tight, and restricted. And by doing that, as I said, this is some thinking that I just don't see being put out there enough, that by freeing up the neck, by optimizing the function of your neck and the tissues within your neck, there's a flow-on effect to your hand, wrist, and forearm. So in my opinion and what I'm finding clinically, based on what I'm finding clinically, so not my opinion in that sense, but my opinion based on the results that I'm getting, is that we can't have a conversation about solely removing restriction from your soft tissue and improving your wrist mobility without connecting the dots back to your neck and the base of your neck. So I really hope that that was insightful. I hope that that was useful. Again, let me know in the comments down below which exercise you found worked best for you. They should each have a distinct role to play in wrist mobility, but I'm interested to know what you might find is better for you. So with that being said, thank you for watching. I hope you found this genuinely helpful and insightful, and then we'll see you in the next one.